It's an honor to have you here. This is very exciting for me. So, this is a party hosted by the Broken Science Initiative. And it'd be fair to ask, what the fuck is that? I would. And so, the idea is to explore broken science, right? That's the initiative. And this is part of that. We're exploring it. There's other things. We got a film project, a documentary, some animated pieces, textbook. There's a lot of potential here in exploring broken science. But you might also ask, what broken in what sense? How, where, why, who, and what do you mean by science? And I'm prepared to take you on a quick journey of that. And this is all part of, so it's the Broken Science Initiative that brought Matt Briggs here, and he's going to speak. And everything I talk about, he knows more about it than I do, except the parts about living with my dad. We're going to talk about living with Dad because it was my father's rearing of me, and his insistence that I read David Stove, from which I found E.T. James, that brought me to Briggs, and I'll give more details on that. But for better or worse, Dr. Briggs is baked into my intellectual pedigree at this point, but he has the distinct advantage of being alive. And so you can talk to him and ask him questions, whereas the others, not so much, less so, unfortunately. I lost my dad last year in November. I think that Dr. Briggs, here I'm introducing him ahead of time, but I'm just to know where you're going, because this might be kind of a convoluted intro. But I do think that he's a very important philosopher, and he's a philosopher with a PhD in mathematics. And I think that his book, Uncertainty, is one of the most important things to have been written in modern times, and certainly on science and probability. So, broken. I might have made up a word, irreplicability. I had to hunt hard to find, Webster's like, that's not a word. And Oxford English Dictionary doesn't like it either. But Wiktionary, whatever the hell that is, they had it. So, good for me. And if I allow remove and removable and irremovable, I don't know, maybe that sounds weird, but it works with replaceable. It works with some words, not others. But I tell you what, and it rolls off the tongue like a bag of rocks. It's horrible. Irreplicability, right? Replicability, it's the incapability of being replicated. And that's the nature of broken science. And the truth of this is that academic science is infected with irreplicability. And to the extent of the affection, that could be debated. According to good Dr. John Ioannidis, who's a colleague of some of our friends here, he says most. I interpret that as more than 50%. In the specifics, if we looked at, and this was published in 2005, Why Most Research Findings Are False. And by the way, everything that we flash on the screen here, on our website, there'll be links to it. You can pull us down and look at it, okay? So everything's available. And Emily Kaplan, raise your hand. Emily's my partner, the very best in this whole initiative. It wouldn't, no one would be here if it weren't for Emily. And then if you look specifically, so this is most research findings are false, and the province here was in the space of healthcare, of medicine. If we get more specifically and look at cancer, at oncology and hematology preclinical, what we found here was that there was an 11% replication on a $1 billion 10-year attempt made by Amgen to replicate the foundations of oncology and hematology. Rodney finds that unacceptable. Yeah, me too, huh? Wonder why we're having trouble making progress in a cure, in a treatment. 11% of it would replicate. We still don't know which of these bedrock studies constituted the bedrock. We don't know what replicated and didn't, but Glenn Begley did tell us here in this house that one of them that didn't replicate has been cited 5,000 times since. It is still considered the gold standard. That's what I mean by broken, right? If that's not broken, what would be? Next, please. I reached out to many of you. A lot of you are old friends. Most of you, some of the new friends, I reached out to them, sent an email. I do this through Emily. I'm email shy. She's not. But what we sent out was that we wanted to have a discussion, and the hypothesis, our lead concept here, hey Gary, good to see you. When predictive value is replaced with consensus as determinant of a model's validity, science becomes nonsense. And one of my favorite responses I got from Matt Briggs, when I got him on the phone, he says, "You think?" And I was like, wow. That no one balked at that. No one balked at that. And I think it's significant. What do we got next here? If I had to make a straw man, this would be it, to show what broken science looks like. But this fella here, and you know, it's not nice to pick on people, and I don't want to make too big a deal of it, maybe. But let me pull this thing out. But it is a gem. A recent study concluded that the consensus on climate change is real. I mean, you just got to stop there. Let me say, the consensus is real. We found from Susan Hack just today, there's a name for when you do that, because what you're trying to infer that the climate change is also real, right? It's trying to go on for the ride. As stories like this usually do, it provoked a lot of outraged commentary. Well, as well it should. One of our Facebook commentators, however, responded with a perfectly legitimate question, and how does consensus fit into the scientific method? And he said, you'd be shocked to know that it does, that that's the aim of the whole thing. And this is, well, let's go to our silly solar system. He says, science is just like a solar system, and the tug and the pull and the goal is always to get consensus. And he says, if you want more information, you go to Thomas Kuhn. And Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, is the most cited book in all of academic literature. Its impact would be hard to overestimate. Now, this good gentleman, this Berezo guy, he's kind of a science ombudsman, a science journalism. And his job is to help people get around, get past, see through shitty science with no sense of it at all that he's a wellspring of it. It's the embodiment of it. It's exactly perfectly wrong. And this is part of the exploration. I would like to explore broken science to the point where guys like this weren't around anymore. And I'm sure he's a nice enough fellow. Maybe we'll invite him to one of these and he can explain the solar system thing. What else we got? So, Jeff Glassman to David Stove to E.T. James to William Briggs. Since the introduction coming, we're almost there. Let's take a look. My father was an electrical engineer. He headed internal research and development at Hughes Aircraft Company. He was a 22-year-old. I think he was 32, 28. He was a signature to in his 20s to the Surveyor program, where Hughes put robots on the moon that dug rocks and came back, and that preceded Apollo. He'd been program manager on just about every major air-to-air weapon system, AMRAAM, Phoenix. And he finally ended up in a position head of internal research and development, and he ran radar labs, infrared labs, laser labs. The Hughes Laser Lab is the first place in the world that was lased. But he was a technologist, and he, in that position as head of internal research and development, he found that it was in Hughes' best interest, with 50,000 employees, California's largest industrial employer, to get into the universities deep, to get into Caltech, to get into MIT, to get into UCLA, to get into UC Irvine. They went everywhere and looking for a bunch of things. Young talent, women in engineering, find them early, identify talent and groom them. And the hardest part of the job, and he says the goal is to make engineers of scientists and scientists of engineers. But one of the largest hurdles, the most important work they had to do, was to teach people in university what science was, that they didn't know. And I watched him in front of large groups of students and professors and physicists and well-known people, in one case even a Nobel laureate, and he would ask them, what is science? And he'd accept everything and put it right on the board, and he'd go on to it for too long, writing everything on the board. Then he puts astronomy on one side and astrology on the other. He goes, okay, I'm going to be the astrologer, and I'll defend my work as science against any of your standards here. I'm ready to go. And it doesn't work until you come to predictive strength. That's the one that works. So the old man, he wrote Evolution in Science. We had some of them here. I don't think we do now. That's this thing. it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I know Briggs is reading it. You digging it, sir? Yeah, it's a good book. And I know Clark, where's Clark? He's my other partner. And there's Clark. What do you say, Clark? It's a readable book, right? Yeah. We can give it to you for free. It's available as a PDF on the website. Clark thinks that's the only thing you need to read. My dad hated Karl Popper. And he was that damn Popper, you know? And I'm hearing this. I'm 3-4 years old, and I just think he's nuts because he won't quit on hating Popper. And that comes up here. He left us with a definition of modern science. He wrote a lot. He did a lot of stuff for us at CrossFit. He left a lot of materials behind from Hughes. We've got notebooks. We've got a lot of his material. And his definition of modern science, I printed up enough of them there so we can get, and what we've done is we've pulled from hundreds of pages of resources and materials and charts and lectures and graphs, very terse. It's terse to the point of seems like it needs an edit, but the idea is damn near every sentence would be the launching point for a discussion to which I could put a footnote on each of the 35 sentences, and we could turn that into a 4-year journey of exploration. But it's simple enough and easy enough. Let's see that. Oh, and he pushed Stove on me. My dad said, you got to read David Stove. You got to read David Stove. You got to read. I started about 7 years ago, and I finished about a year ago, and I'm starting over again. It gets better with each reading, and you see things more clearly. It's a very, very tough read. It's a tough read, right? That's not easy stuff. It's not easy stuff. And his well, I'm not ready for Stove. So anyways, let's go on to this. About my dad not liking Popper. Popper says, I do not believe in definitions, and I do not believe definitions lead to exactness. Science, I do not try to define it. Definitions are either unnecessary or unconscious conventional dogmas. To which my dad says, Popper eschews definitions and then defines things. You can find all sorts of contradictions in Popper. And he didn't like them. Next slide. Now that's the piece that you can pull out of the folder and read it. Notice the number of times that prediction sits on this. Very short, it matters. Here's the 5 criteria from that sheet, and these are easy to wrap yourself around. I'll just roll you through them because I'm going to ask you. I'm saying you got to believe these. You got an argument with them. Let's look at that. I mean, when my father left Hughes, 40% of the satellites that were in orbit globally were launched by Hughes. That's the kind of, and so maybe it would have been 80% if he'd had this right. But I think it likely works. But check this out. Modern science is the source and repository of objective knowledge. And if someone wants to take the time, what do you mean by objective? I mean the same thing that E.T. James meant by it. Yeah, like that. He wrote brilliantly on that. So it's source and repository of objective knowledge. This knowledge silos and models graded by their predictive strength, conjecture, hypothesis, theory, and law. That on the one-page sheet, you'll see what it is that works you, what happens to a conjecture to make a hypothesis, how it is that a theory has one non-trivial datum supporting the conclusion. Models map a current fact to a future unrealized fact as a prediction. Predictive strength is the sole determinant of validation. The sole determinant of validation. And from that, you could derive the 5th one, but we've come to understand this has to be said, that validation and method are entirely independent. That whether this comes through inspiration or perspiration, you wake up and God E = MC squared, you did it, okay? You can't say that doesn't count because you didn't do it through the right method. That's not how modern science works. Next. And what I'd like you to do, and we'll give you a link, is look, all this Wikipedia stuff, each of these is significant because this is a great use of Wikipedia because in each of these they've missed something really, really important. And I love Wikipedia for how much I hate it. Everything I've ever cared about is wrong, including me. But this doesn't matter here because these are very real issues. One's a crisis, a war. What do we got here? A problem, right? And what I ask is that if you go back to my 5 criteria, to our 5 criteria of modern science, one slide back, if you consider these and then go through those wars, conundrum, lemmas, call it what you want. They are very real issues, whether it's the demarcation problem, metascience, scientific method, misconduct, probability interpretations. Looked at through the lens of those 5 criteria, you find clarity where there was fog. You find that you pick a side in the wars. Let's just take one, the interpretation of probability. One of the interpretations of probability denies validation for science. You can go that route, but you can end up with the replication crisis. That's the frequentist angle. And what's the problem there? It's the frequentist insistence that the probability of hypotheses doesn't have meaning. Well, remember, it's the probability of the model that finds its validation. And so what's happened is in that system, validation has been flensed from the scientific method and replaced with confidence intervals and p-values. So it's a wonderful romp through issues as far as, maybe seemingly unrelated, but and there's others. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I've got many. These are the most enjoyable and kind of the easiest things. You're like, well, shit, if it validates through predictive strength, I mean, what's the demarcation problem? They tell you, this is a 2,000-year-old problem. We just solved it right now. It's predictive strength. That is the demarcation between science and non-science. Next. My dad insisted I read Stove. I eventually did. I liked him. He was a philosopher and essayist. He wrote Probability and Hume's Inductive Skepticism in 1971. That's this one here. It is absolutely stunning. I don't know if it messed me up or not, but I went backwards through the way Stove wrote. I read the thing he wrote first, and I eventually got back to the start. I think it might have been like watching a movie in reverse. But he got more and more brilliant, and I realized that he wasn't getting more and more brilliant. I was just getting back to the start. And if I had gone the other way, maybe I wouldn't have stuck with it. But he started on some wonderful technical grounds. He did a very good job, right, Matt? The arguments are very strong. And I know in some cases it may be better than Jaynes did on some issues. But he went from here and then turned his attention increasingly to the irrationalists when this was getting ignored, I think is what happened. And he went after Kuhn, Feyerabend, Lakatos, and Popper, and ended up a Popper hater. The next book is Popper and After, and this book was so good it had to be put out 3 times, right, Roger, with different covers and a afterward and a forward and a different title, and it's still, I don't know what's going on, but this is the most important thing never read. And it's absolutely wonderful. These 2 books are amazing. The third one, The Rationality of Induction, is also stunning. It's just a beautiful, wonderful work, and I'm not going to stand here and give you too much detail on it. I might end up doing that anyways. But let me tell you what I got out of this. First of all, he hated Popper, which is like, it's cool. And he gives all the rationale needed to reject everything the irrationalists offered. And so, for instance, I'll just tell you one thing. These guys, the team, all of them, they were very different in some regards. That is, Popper, Kuhn, Feyerabend, Lakatos. But they do represent, for all sakes and purposes, the entirety of the academic recognition of the philosophy of science. Together, separately, they constitute almost the entirety of it. And though they may differ significantly, I told someone last night that it's kind of like looking at Jeffrey Dahmer and Manson and John Wayne Gacy and comparing and contrasting how they're similar and different, and they're like what their order was at McDonald's, but never covering the fact that they're fucking murderers, right? That, mass murders, that gets left out. These guys denied the probability logic. They denied the role of induction. That's what they had in common. And the university philosophy of science carries it to that day, that same taint, that same contamination. And we saw it in Mr. Berezo's view of the solar system, that silly solar system, and consensus being the key to things. But he gives you all the rationale you need to reject. Oh, just on one case, these 4 irrationalists love to use common words and put quotes around them or not. And Stove says this is like fresh fish. it means, you don't know what it means, but you know it's not fresh, right? And he does this to logic, he does this to prove, does it to shows, and it's all the reason you need to stop reading. Well, how do you read something when I'm supposed to imagine what the hell you mean? I'm in a fantasy world at that time. It's not in the space of logic. That's not science. Does another thing is he would perform this epistemic debasement by attaching a conditional on it, the weird conditional, I think so. P entails Q according to most scientists, and now it's not a logical statement. And that's another reason just to quit reason. The books, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever read, I think, in some regards. But you don't have to go too far to realize that there's not much sense in trying to make sense of these irrationalists in their position. He makes a powerful case for science grounding in probability theory. I came away at the end of this book, and I was like, okay, now I'm back at 1971. I get it. The university's offering, and you know what we're doing here? We're talking about correcting a curriculum, and you can almost do it with scissors. I'm going to take Kuhn and Popper and Feyerabend and Lakatos out, and I'm going to replace them with, I'll tell you later, and David Stove will be our rationale for doing so. But he makes this powerful case for the grounding in probability theory. I'm convinced, but I need more. And he neuters the destructive influence of Hume's inductive skepticism. And I think he did it fairly brilliantly, but he allowed me, because everyone loves Hume, and I didn't want to be the one guy. I think he was full of shit. But so what you do is Hume's inductive skepticism. We say that what he was saying was that you don't get ones and zeros, you don't get certainty, and that's and it'll never deliver that. And I'm okay, now Hume's okay and irrelevant. We'll just ignore that, because that isn't where we're going. That's not what probability theories. The probability theories are theories that find their validation in their predictive value, and that's greater than 0 and less than 1. That's the in-between space. Next. So Jaynes comes next. I tell you, when I'm done with Stove, I'm very unsettled. I'm thinking, geez, if Stove is right, and I'm sure he is, I've got to be able to go over to the probability side of the world and look through and see David Stove and find the structure and fabric of science and the foundations. And so I went to Google Scholar and I looked up textbooks in probability theory. And I knew I had the good ones when they're 165 bucks for a book. That's a textbook, right, Doc? And I picked 6 or 7 of the most popular. One of them was entitled Probability Theory, The Logic of Science. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty close to what I'm looking for. They all started showing up. I picked that book up, and it's this thing. And the professor in the Amazon reviews, it says, this might be the most important book ever written on science, or any subject, or something to that effect. You can smile and you understand exactly what he's feeling. But the work is amazing, and what you find in there is an extraordinarily well-developed probability logic, the very thing that Popper, and he hated Popper. You find that, which is great, right? It's a theme now. And by the way, our Broken Science Initiative could also be the Jaynes Society or the I Hate Popper Club, or you could. We have more than just the Broken Science in common, but what we get from Jaynes is a wonderful tour of the work that Laplace, Jeffreys, Cox, Pauly, and Shannon did to produce a probability logic that supports a science that replicates, is the heart of it all. And what I would do is these are the guys that from Stove, I'd say Stove got rid of these dudes, and I would replace them with these guys. What's fascinating here is that Laplace, does he need introduction? Jeffreys has probably done more work in geophysics, more important work in geophysics than anyone living. Cox made a significant discovery. He's a physicist on electron spin that everyone ignored, and they came back to him 20 years later. Hey, dude, you were right. And he goes, yeah, I know, but no one wanted to hear about it. Shannon, the father of modern information theory, who grew up in the same town that Matt did, right, Matt? And Pauly, I left him out on plausible reasoning. I'm going to stick David Stove in there. He tips his hat to him and kicks Popper in the balls by yet another method to convince you that there's nothing there for David Popper. And what do we got after this? Here's my friend here. Let me tell you how I found him. So when I realized from Stove that there's got to be someone in probability theory, I find Jaynes. And now I'm finding I got Jaynes and Stove, and they're both dead. Now it's just me. There's got to be someone else that's seen this, right? And I'm gonna make you do the research. But I knew that there would be someone that's found Stove and Jaynes if I could put out in the universe, if baby cries, then we beat him, and I got a response. And I put that in, and the top shit that comes up is Matt Briggs. So I get over there, then I found he's a mathematician. He's a mathematician, has been canceled for his heresy on climate. He's also been a heretic on the COVID subject, and I'm like, oh, I really like this guy. I have to meet him, and I'm proud to introduce him. He's become a friend. Through my dad, but via Stove and Jaynes, I found a new math teacher. Come on up here, William.